Started. So I'm really excited for our last class to have Reservation Dogs and Tasma Chavez, who is the director and EP on the show. You've directed on season 1 and these 2 episodes that we just saw. And you just said you were in the writer's room for season 3. So we're very excited that it's getting its 3rd season. Thank you very much for coming. I love this show so much. I just binge it,
Well, thank you for having me.
You watch it. I think I watched the first season in 2 sittings, and then the second season in 1.5 sittings. So it's hard to put down. I do have a couple questions. Rewatching this episode, the final scene of the second episode that we saw. Now, I don't. If you guys haven't seen, how many people here have seen Reservation Dogs? Okay, so just a couple.
Oh my God, you guys should watch it.
There is, I should have mentioned this when I was talking about it earlier. It is definitely a very character-driven show, but there is a magical realism, I guess. There's a spirit guide who shows up. Is he a spirit guide? The spirit guide, and then there's a ghost, I think, shows up. Is there a ghost? So my question was, does she hear that music at the end when she goes into the bedroom, or is that the soundtrack? Is that something she's hearing, and that's why she's going to the bedroom?
That's something that she's hearing.
Okay.
And she goes back there, and that's sort of her moment where she realizes she's kind of alone in the world now,
right,
since her grandma passed. But yeah, she does hear it.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it was and it was kind of a different feeling. It was a little spooky.
Well, the funny part about that is when we were shooting that, Oklahoma, we shoot on location in Oklahoma, and the weather. Is anyone from Oklahoma in here? No? Okay. Me neither. But the weather there is really unpredictable. We shoot from March to June, which is tornado season, the whole thing. And so sometimes you're in really hot weather, and then sometimes there's a tornado warning. And when rainstorms and lightning starts there, you have to shut down. And so the reason that even feels like that is because that day we were stuck in that house for 2 hours because of a lightning call. And so so when we were finally able to shoot again, it was storming and thundering outside. And so that's not an added sound effect. That's
but the lightning had moved.
Yeah. So, and actually when we were in post, we really ended up loving it. We're like, oh, this wasn't something that we necessarily thought was included in the scene, but it worked really well.
Yeah, no, the thunder was very effective. Yeah. That's interesting. So can you just, it's such it's still unusual to have a female director in television, which is terrible, and especially someone who is so young. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your career and how you came to be on this show, but just also just how you sort of, because did you start as a writer or did you start as a director?
I started working in beauty retail.
Okay, so let's go way back.
Yeah.
Tell the whole story.
I actually started out as a poet first and foremost. I started as a performance poet, and I've been doing that since I was about 14. And the reason that I am even in the position that I'm in now is because, so I'm, first of all, can I introduce myself really quick so I can give you guys context?
Sorry.
It's okay. So my name's Tasma Chavez. I am a citizen of the Bishop Paiute tribe, which is up near Mammoth. So if any of you go skiing or snowboarding up there, that's where I'm from. There's a reservation there that I'm born and raised on. So my dad's side, we're Paiute, and my mom's side, we're Navajo. And so I mention that because the first time I had contact with film as a medium was through a preventative program that my father helped co-create with Native writers, directors, actors, musicians back in 2000. And they designed it so that they would keep us res kids kind of out of trouble for the summer. But that was the first time that I was introduced to a camera and I learned how to edit. And so it was planted very early on, but the first film I ever made was this angsty teen poetic experimental montage. And so I think from the start I always really wanted to both write and direct. But by the time I got into television, I started what kind of got my foot in the door was a short film that I wrote and directed. And that sort of became my calling card to, for my reps to send out. And so I always knew that I wanted to do write and direct, but I was hired first as a writer. So I worked probably, I worked on 3 shows before I directed my first episode. So so technically, like in TV, I started out as a writer first.
So how did you? I mean, so you said you did a short film. Was that just
Mm.
something that you had done because of this
Yeah. So
experience, this class, or?
yeah. So I feel like I had like a really long trajectory, but a really fast one once I committed to it full time. So I started very young, like around 14, made like some short films in high school. Then when I went to college, I didn't go to film school because I didn't come from a place where people thought that the arts was something that you could get a degree in. It's very much like go be a lawyer or go be a doctor, like just make sure you're not as poor as we grew up. And so that's kind of, so I actually went to school for, I went to UCLA, I'm sorry. But I went for American Indian Studies because I wanted to be a federal Indian law attorney because I was like, I'm going to get the land back. But then, alongside that, I was, I'd been a writer since I was very young, and I knew that I wanted to do filmmaking. I just didn't quite know how. So long story short, when I was in college, I interned for Sundance Institute's Native and Indigenous program and met who would later become my bosses and my mentors, Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi, who I've known since I was 20 years old. And those two are sort of two people in my life that even when I was selling shampoo at the mall, because I was like, what am I going to do with my life after I graduated undergrad? Those two were always pushing me to be like, what are you going to make? What are you going to make? And so I had an opportunity to make a short film called Your Name Is in English. And that was EP'd by Taika, but it was through a program called AT&T Hello Labs. And so I didn't make that until I was like 30. And so I had this whole other career working as like a beauty care educator. But the thing is a lot of those skills are transferable to writing, to being in writers' rooms and to also directing, because my job in that role was to customer service behaviors, business acumen, presentation and facilitation skills, and leading everybody towards a common vision. And so once I got back into a creative field, I was like, wow, a lot of those years were actually spent building the skill set that I might not have had otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So you had this film, and then you got on. I'm sorry, what shows did you write for?
The first show I staffed on was Resident Alien, which is a sci-fi.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that show, actually.
I love that show.
And so how did you get to this show?
So this show, I staffed first on Resident Alien, then I went to a show called Rutherford Falls, which was on Peacock, starring Ed Helms and Janice Schmieding. And after that show, and Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs were sort of maybe 3 months apart in terms of their green lights. And these were the first 2 Indigenous comedies ever. So Rutherford Falls was the first time we ever, in the United States anyways, had an Indigenous showrunner and story as a comedy. And then Reservation Dogs was just months behind that. And so Sterling, who's the showrunner, and then Taika, who are the co-creators, I have such a long friendship with them. So when it came time to staff the room, it wasn't just because we were buddies. It was because I had 2 other seasons under my belt of television. And so it was a very natural fit to come onto the show. So season 1, there was only 6 of us that wrote season 1. And then season 2, we expanded to 11.
So you were a writer and a director. So you
yes,
and from the very beginning.
Yep.
So talk about what that was like. I mean, obviously, as you say, this was the second Indigenous comedy, but it's also it's the second show that sort of is all about life on the reservation in a way that is the story is told from people who lived on a reservation, as opposed to it being filtered through a white gaze.
Yeah. So that show, all of the writers on Reservation Dogs are Indigenous, all of the directors are, and all of the lead cast is. And that's the first time that's ever happened. Rutherford Falls was not, while it was like a half Native writers room, maybe one Native director, but Reservation Dogs really, Sterling, to Sterling Harjo's credit, the showrunner, he really committed to that. And he kicked a door open to give us a lot of our first episode. So he's who gave me my first episode of television to direct, which was California Dreamin' in season 1. And so that's how that came to be.
And how was that?
Amazing. It was awesome, but I also, when I got the opportunity to, I think I found out in January that I got an episode. and I knew that I was going to start shooting in March. And so I went and figured, I mean, it wasn't like it was like I had no film knowledge. It's like I had interned, I had taken classes, I like made films when I was young, but this was different. Like television directing is like, it's a beast. It's so fast and it's such a different process. So in that 2 months, I read everything that I could. I took UCLA extension classes. Like I filled in the gaps that I had so that I made sure that not only did I get this opportunity, but when I had it, I was going to do the best job I could. And that included me needing to learn some things that I just hadn't yet. And so I think that's been one of the things that has helped me in this, trajectory is I'm really good at knowing what I don't know. And then I go figure out what I don't know. So the first television directing experience on this show was incredible. I mean, I had Sterling, his whole thing is he's like, I'm not going to leave you, but then he did leave me. But it kind of was like an honor at one. I joke, I was like, he kicked me off the tit because like he was kind of like hovering and it was making me not make choices myself. And he just walked away. And from then on, I was like, man, I got this. This is the best job in the world. Yeah.
What were some of the things that you didn't know that you like reached out?
There's like two specific things. One was doing overheads. So, shot listing is like one thing, going through like the breakdown of the scripts another, but my brain had a hard time actually looking at a floor plan from above. And it had a hard time placing suddenly making my brain go like 3D. And Sydney Freeland, who is really the first Indigenous female director she's so accomplished, she sat down with me because she directed the block before me, and she came to my hotel and she like taught me how to do my overheads. And so that was one of the things that I was just like, my brain just doesn't work like this. Now it does. The other thing that I think I was most nervous about was directing actors and directing actors for the camera. And so I prepared for that by taking classes in that. But I mean, I think the person I was most nervous to direct was Bill Burr, because my only impression of him had been his stand-up. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then, I meet with him and he's just a dad. He's like a really nice dude who wanted to do a really great job. And I think once I got past that, I feel like it's just facing like the things you're afraid of. Yeah.
What some of the actors are fairly young and unknown, or this is like their first. What was that like when you were talking about directing actors? Because I mean, on the one hand, you're scared when you're dealing with somebody who's experienced.
Yep.
But on the other hand, you also have to deal with, although by season 2, they all seem to be much more comfortable in their roles. But what was it like in the first season with some of these young folks?
I mean, I think it really...
We love Willie Jack.
She's God, I love Willie Jack. Willie Jack is like every girl I grew up with. I love her so much. I think you have to, when you're working with a combination of new actors and seasoned actors, you really do have to, meet everybody where they're at and find a way to communicate to them and kind of figure out what makes sense for them and what brings things out for them. And I think, working retail actually made me really good at that, because I spent every day interacting with so many people from different walks of life that I could honestly talk to anybody. But I think with like the younger ones, it was like having to, make sure that you had really good examples of equivalence. Like if it's like giving them something else to think about that maybe isn't what the scene's about, but would emote a similar emotion, so that they're still pulling it from an authentic place, even if it's not necessarily about like what's on the page. And I think with them, that was really helpful.
And how involved because this is such a unique show with a unique cast, a unique crew, how involved were the non-writers in terms of informing the story? Because it is, like, I would just imagine everybody had a welter of experience that they wanted to, share. And how was that? I mean,
do you mean non-writers, like the
actors?
The actors, yeah.
The crew. I mean, did people have stories from their own experience that they wanted to see in case this was the only time they had a
Oh my
chance
gosh.
to.
The thing is season 1, we thought we were never going to
Right.
be able
I
to
mean,
do this
that's what
again.
I'm saying. It's like, this is it.
Yeah, this is the only time anyone's going to give Indians money. But luckily that wasn't true. Yeah. I think the fun part about Res Dogs, and I think you see it come across, is that it's a really fun and really warm set. And there's a lot of encouraged improv. And there is, regardless of who's directing, there's myself and Sterling and another co-EP who a scene may be just like hilarious, and we'll just start throwing stuff off the top and just start riffing and be like, say this now, say that now. Or like people like Paulina, for example, I mean, she'll just go. And so there's certain actors that also in comedy who, if you just let them go past and not call cut, that's where you find a lot of gold. Janice Schmeeding, who plays Bev in Wide Net, is like that. Like when you're done with the scene, if you just let her go, she will say things that you couldn't even think of as a writer. And Paulina is like that as well. So the set is very inviting in that way, that we really want people to feel like they're a part of the creative process, and it's not super rigid. Because I've also worked on comedies that are a different style of comedy that's more like a sitcom, where it's like the jokes are hitting in a certain way, and if you change a word, it changes the joke. And so that's a very regimented type. This is honestly a bunch of people who've been friends for like 20 years, just making people say things that make each other laugh.
So in the first season focuses a lot more on the younger members of the cast, and then the second season you sort of branch out. I mean, I loved the Wide Net. I mean, and also I just have to say, where she says, "I pray that I will have a little accident, so I'm in the hospital for like just through." Every working mother I know has had that prayer. It's just like, I just want a little surgery that won't be that scary, but then I can just lay down for like 4 days. So I love that. I also have to say, watching it again, I love the shot of the feet in the cubicle in the bathroom, and when she had her foot on the side, and then when she realizes that it's her friend and her foot moves up. That was a really beautiful shot. But so what is the grand plan then? I mean, when you mapped out like sort of the whole show, that we're going to start with the kids and then move, and then is it going to get even broader in season 3 or?
Yeah. What I can say about season 3 without giving anything away is, I think the thing with season 3 is that really you're going to see how everything is connected intergenerationally. That there are res dogs of not only the parents' generation, but the elders' generation. And we're going to get insight into sort of how all of those people are connected, and the things that happen to one generation, if they're not taken care of properly, will filter down. And I think the beautiful part about after season 2 and going to season 3 is that this generation, the teenagers, they've learned how to properly grieve a friend in a way that their parents and maybe grandparents didn't. And so there may not be some like lessons they can give upward from that.
Yeah, because the show sort of starts with them grieving their Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel, sorry. Yeah. And that's a thread that keeps going throughout it's kind of it's not about like and then we're over it.
Yeah. Which, the reception of that has been really well in terms of the way that we've handled a loss like that, in that it's not just a one-time thing. It wasn't just like a plot point to like be a means to an end, but the truth is, like, you have 2 seasons of a community grieving the loss of this boy. And I think we're really proud of taking our time with that grief process.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is, it's unusual, and it's really kind of refreshing is not the word way to talk about grief, but it's like, it is kind of, in some shows you'll have something terrible happen and there'll be 2 episodes devoted to it, and then it'll be like, well, so-and-so wouldn't want us to grieve, so we're just gonna like it's like, oh, I don't care what they want, I'm still grieving, but yeah. You know what I mean? And so I really appreciate that. But what was the next question I was going to ask you, and now it's like gone. I loved in the first season the spicy chips the first episode they steal a truck full, but I love the fact that like there are so many like wonderful details, like Elora gets the stomach ache and then she has because she eats too many spicy chips.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like those kind of granular details. I guess that's one of the things I was at, like, where did those come from? I mean, I'm assuming they come from people's own experiences with spicy chips.
Yeah, I don't know. We love hot Cheetos, but we can't afford hot Cheetos to use their names.
Yeah,
So
I
we have
wondered
flaming
about that
flavors.
actually. They're like some random non-brand.
Yeah, some
situation.
non-brand. It's funny because in season 3 now they're looking for brand placement. It's so funny. It's
That
like
is funny.
you know, season 1 you have to invent everything because you can't afford to license certain brands, and now season 3 like, can you guys please look for a place where you could put a product? It's like very funny.
Really?
Yeah.
So like, what are some of the products that are asking? Is it Flaming Hot Cheetos?
No, I mean Sonic's was one of them we finally got, but then now they want us to choose. So, I mean, we can go back to them with ideas, but I don't know if I can say because it might give things away. But yeah, those little details though come from all of the writers and our experiences, and there's just certain things like no matter what res you go to, there's just like certain things that we all know about and have, and I think that's one of the benefits of having Indigenous directors telling Indigenous stories, because it's one thing to write it, but when you think about all the decisions that get made in the process of directing, you know, it's like we're the ones really in there like making Alora's car super messy and adding these little things and adding the eagle feather, and like you can only kind of do that if you come from that place and you know what that's like. And so I think the authenticity in this show really comes from just having the people whose story it is be made by those people. It's like you just get all of these granular nuance.
And how was it? I mean, what was your interaction with the network? I mean, were they supportive? We were talking earlier about notes and, you know, the myth of no notes. And I mean, but how involved, because it would be, I mean, I'm assuming I can't think of an Indigenous network executive at FX. I mean, did they like sort of give you license?
Yeah, I will say that FX is very creative friendly. Like they are very creator friendly. FX really does let you do what you want to do. Of course, there's going to be things where they'll come in with sort of like the executive macro notes of like, oh, you know, what is this person's like track? And we're like, oh yeah, there's an arc. So it's nice. I think executive notes are great in that way because sometimes you're just in it and you're making funny things, you're making meaningful things, but every now and then you do realize like somebody's arc dropped off. And so, you know, for those are the kinds of notes that they'll give, but they've never once told us like we couldn't do something.
Right.
I mean, you saw season 2, they let us do stuff with catfish.
Right. Right. Well, you know, it's FX.
Yeah, they're, they're very creator friendly.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, do you think now, I'm not asking like you're paying attention to like everything that's being made, but you were talking about how Rutherford Falls and then Reservation Dogs happen 1, 2, 3. Do you know, are there any other shows? I mean, have we broken a barrier? Because like so often we'll have a show like this and it'll be like, oh, now the gates are open. And it's like, no, that was the show.
There is on AMC, there's a drama Dark Winds, which is in its 2nd season. So that's cool.
Good one.
There's a new kids animation called Spirit Rangers, which that's the first animation in that space of like Indigenous animation. It's very cute. And I know that there are things in development. There's a lot of stuff in development, but the thing with development, as we know, or you will learn, is that until it's on a screen, it's not real. But right now there's a lot being sold and there's a lot, you know, of pilots being written. And so I'm hopeful and I think I'm optimistic that it's a door kicked open and not just a moment.
And are you working on other things?
Yes, I have.
That you cannot say anything
Well,
about?
I can say one thing. There's a new show from Howard Gordon who did like 24 and Homeland and those, a new show that he has called Accused. Yeah, he's great. So I got to write and direct an episode for his new anthology series called Accused. And so that will come out in January. And that's my first step into our drama, which is really exciting. So
you directed that. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you like directing now? I mean, is that what you want to do, or do you want to
I want to do
both?
Yeah.
Do both?
Yeah. It's fun. It's like I also did a couple episodes of Sex Lives of College Girls, which my episodes are next week. And that was fun because that was the first time directing on something I don't write on, where you have to go in just as a guest director. And that was fun. It was a new experience.
And how did that come about? Did they just ask you?
They just reached out. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. That was a moment for me too, because I think as like a creator of color, like you don't want to just be pigeonholed into only feeling like your skill set is useful for your own community. And so I think being tapped for Sex Lives of College Girls really for me was a confidence boost. And like, my identity is not the thing that's being asked for right now. It's like my skill set is. And that was very fun. That was very cool to just go offer my expertise in college girls who have sex. Like, that was fun.
Do you feel like, I mean, you know, it has been such a closed shop for so long, and there have been a million different arguments about why it was closed shop. It's like, we need people with experience, or we need, you know, we only take it from, you know, certain agents, or do you feel like it's different? It seems like it's different, but it's also, you know, there's also the box checking, you know, oh, well, we had a woman last season direct, does it feel like there's a more tectonic shift?
I do feel like people are giving folks their first. It kind of depends, actually. I think there's still. I would say like comedy is a space where I feel like people are giving people their first chances versus drama. I find drama harder to. I think drama and action are the places where people want you to have something under your belt. And I understand, like, when it's like to direct something with like high action is like you can't just be like. It would just be hard. Like, you need at least like the experience of like leading teams and being on set. But you know, I think for our community specifically, I think that it's changing because we finally have people like Sterling and people like Sierra Teller Ornelas who are in positions of hiring power, and that makes a big difference in who can get hired. And I think one of the things that's unique about it is that they're looking at storytellers from all backgrounds and looking at it from you know, because we come from oral history cultures, Indigenous people do, and so that's just as valid to us as somebody who can write something down. And so I think what's cool within our community and for Sterling and Sierra is that, you know, they've hired poets, they've hired stand-up comedians, they've hired people who made funny Instagram videos, you know, for writing. And I think it's just recognizing that there's a skill set, there's a talent there, and I think they're willing to take the time to hone it into this medium. And so I can't speak for like other people, but I think for our community specifically, that's very encouraging, and I think it is moving things along a little faster.
Oh, that's good. I just remembered what I was going to ask, but then I forgot. Were they supposed to, the influencers, that little, like, I mean, the second episode where you have this, is that like a little retreat or like a little group learning experience? But like those, they were just hilarious. And is that like something that exists that you've had to deal with, those kind of classes? Where it's
my God. Okay, there's two things. One, though, that youth conference is something that every Native kid on a res has attended. 100%. Like, we grew up and your parents would drop you off at something like that, and it's always somebody coming into the community who's probably not the best example, but they're the ones teaching you how to like decolonize and how to be super Native. And for res kids, we're just like, they could just like see through it. But we all attended those. I think that some of the writers in the room are guilty of being those people, of being the influencers at those things. But also, those influencers come from a really fun world called Native TikTok. And if you're bored later, you can put in hashtag Native TikTok and you will see amazing things, but you'll also see folks like that. And there's actually a cold open to that got cut where we made fake TikToks with those influencers. Which was very funny, but you know, you only have so many minutes. But yeah, those come from real things.
I loved it. Well, I grew up in the Bay Area. My body grew up in the Great Bay Area.
But my spirit lives with my ancestors.
That was very funny. She was really hilarious, and the actor was really good as her. Um, okay, having remembered my question, I'm going to open it up, and you guys can ask your questions. Do you need my mic? Do you have mics? Okay. Yeah, I thought that episode was just hilarious.
It was very fun to
And I just loved the whole thing about the gift cards. That was so funny.
Hi, I'm Grace. Thank you for coming. I was just wondering, with this being one of the only, if not the only show with like so many Indigenous main characters, did you feel any pressure with that? And if so, how did you navigate it?
Not really, because it's so supportive. Like, the other Native directors on the show, we all sort of overlap our blocks, and everyone is like super encouraging and super helpful to each other. There's not really a lot of competition, and I think in terms of like, I think what it is like there could have been a feeling of going in like, if I fail, like this is gonna be awful, but it just, there was no way that we were gonna fail, because there's so many people there to support you and to help and to back you up and to like carry you across the finish line. So for that reason, I think that kind of kept a lot of the nerves at bay, or the pressure anyway. The nerves were there. There's nerves every time, but the pressure wasn't quite as bad, because especially season 1, because we were like, well, we'll probably never do this again, so whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Anne. Thank you very much for coming. I guess my question is, just, I'm curious because you said that you like took a lot of classes for preparation, and I'm just curious, like, what are some things that you experienced that were like important lessons that were not taught in class, and then that you have to like experience it as like a director or creator on set?
Yeah, I think some of the things that you learn like in real time is like how much you control the overall energy and like the vibe on the set, and that if you get stressed out, everybody else gets stressed out. But if you're chilling and you have good vibes, like the crew will have a lot more fun, and when people are having fun, they will work harder. I think also one of the things that I learned is that the greatest gift that you can give a crew is to finish on time or to finish early. And I think it's realizing, like, what you realize when you're really in it is that there's so many people that are involved in making whatever is here come to life, and that it's not the director that has the camera on the shoulder. It's not the director holding the boom mic. It's not the director like doing take after take of crying. And so it's like, I think one of the things that I learned anyway was like really about the importance of respecting all the human bodies that it takes to make what we see on the screen, and that you know, they could care less about like the gift of a food truck, and they could care more about being able to go home to their families a little bit early. And so that was something that like I think you just that I learned on set that I maybe wouldn't have realized in a class.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lexi. Thank you so much for being here. I love the show. I'm definitely gonna go binge watch it when I get home. You mentioned that you directed for Sex Lives of College Girls, and I really like that show. And I love Renee Rapp, and I love her music and all that. So I'm just wondering what it was like working with her.
Oh, she's great. She's easy in the sense that like she takes direction really well. She's very funny. She's as soon as you call cut, she's like singing. So she's constantly like singing on set. But she was absolutely lovely. And one thing I love about her is that she is willing to try different things. So like she's willing to give you kind of to play with different attitudes and different takes of things, and she's always a good sport about it. So she's awesome. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jared. Thank you so much for coming. I feel like a big reason, or like one of the many reasons, like minority directors and writers weren't allowed to make stories is because Hollywood told people that they wouldn't appease to a broad audience, or people, you know, of different races, sexualities, genders, things like that wouldn't enjoy shows that they didn't see themselves in. And this show was hilarious, and I think everyone felt like that. So I'm wondering, and like obviously I can't attest to it, but it felt like an authentic, Native experience, and that what you were writing about. So I'm wondering how you balanced not whitewashing or watering down your experience and other Native experiences, but also making the humor and all the other heartwarming moments really universal.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think Reservation Dogs is a really good example of when you make a story without the audience in mind, and you make a story that is what you know, and that you let people in on the joke, but you never explain it. And that the more specificity you have, that sort of breeds something universal. Because I've definitely worked on things where, coming back to like notes from networks, like I've definitely worked on other shows where it was maybe too nuanced or too specific. And so the network was like, well, can you explain what they're doing here? Can you explain? And then that's when you start to appease like a non-native audience. And you do start, that to me is where you get into cringe land. You ever watch something and you're just like, I know that you have to explain this, but it just feels like cringy that you're having to. I feel like that's usually like you're answering to like a network who's telling you to explain something. So I feel like Res Dogs is this beautiful example of having great collaborators in FX who never made us explain anything. And so, I think that's the more specific you are, I think sometimes is where you get relatability to the rest of the world.
Hi. Oh, wait, it's on. Hi, my name is Marguerite. Thank you so much for coming.
I was like, where are you?
Oh, yeah, I'm over here. I wanted to ask, you had talked about how it took you didn't know like right away that you wanted to be directing and writing. And I was just wondering, like, what was it for you that made you decide, like, this is what I want to do as a career path? Or like,
yeah, I have like a very specific moment. Because I was, I made films when I was young. Then I went to college for something totally different. Then I graduated in the recession. And so then I worked retail and was just like, I don't want to move home, so I'm going to sell shampoo. And I did that for a long time and it was fine. I had health insurance. I paid my bills. I could buy a car. It was great. But I had a moment when I was studying for the LSAT. I was like, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to be a lawyer. And I was doing that in the mornings. I was working my job and I just came home one day. I was living in Seattle at the time. And do any of you sit in your car after you park for like a really long time? Okay, I was having one of those nights. And it was like raining in Seattle. There was just a porch light lighting me in my car. And I was just like, man, like when I'm 80, I'm not going to regret not being a lawyer. And when I'm 80, I'm not going to regret not being, because you guys, I studied for the LSAT. I studied for business school. I was like trying to get an MFA in poetry. Like I was just like trying to do anything. And when I really thought about it, I was like, I'm not going to regret not doing any of those things. But the one thing that I would regret is if I didn't try to be an artist and a storyteller full time. And I was at a point in my life where it was just me. And I decided to jump off this cliff and like quit my corporate job. And I told myself, like, if I've been devoting myself to hundreds, probably thousands of women's careers for 60 hours a week, and I did that for myself, like, what could that look like in 6 months? And so that night, I decided that I was going to move back to LA, and I used that company to do it. It was like a position open in LA. I came back, and then I spent that time getting reacquainted with my relationships I had here who were in film. And I just decided to quit my corporate job. I mean, I did it responsibly though. Like I saved up. I wasn't like crazy about it, but I really only had like 6 months of anything to live off of. And I was like this, but the thing is if it didn't work out, I was going to be okay going back to working in corporate beauty care because I wouldn't have had the regret of not trying anymore. If that makes sense. But that's where that came from.
Hi. My name is Laura. Thank you so much for being here. I was just wondering, with this show being such a big step in representation, as you were talking about earlier, if there was any moment working on the show that you were particularly proud of or that you felt like paid off after working on it for a long time?
Wide Net is like the proudest thing that I have ever made in my life, the first episode you guys watched, because up until that episode is the first time that any comedy has had 4 Native female leads in it. We've never, ever, ever, as a community, had an episode of television like that. It was written by a Native woman, directed by a Native woman, starred 4 Native lead women in the cast. And we also have never been able to be seen as sexual beings, as people who party, as people who have sisterhood. Like we're sort of like female Native characters are sort of usually deduced to victims of horrific trauma, or were somebody's spirit guide in a dream. It's like really, it's not a lot. We usually die. And so to me, like Wide Net was such a celebration of Native women, because those are the women that I know. Like, we're not, and I love that line that Natalie has in there, and she's like, yeah, we're just supposed to be all like sacred and traditional all the time. That's how people like, I think we're supposed to be, and I think sometimes our own community makes us feel like that. And so I think that's probably the moment that episode is like the proudest moment. And actually within that episode, the proudest moment is that dance scene. Like, they got to live out the 90s dream I never did. So that was really, really fun too. I can hear.
Hi. You have such an amazing cast with this project, and I have to imagine that, like, with having a focus on the younger cast and having to find like all Native actors, that it had to be a challenging process. Could you just talk about how you went through that logistically?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the pilot, Sterling and Taika, when they were casting that, they worked with a casting director that named Angelique Midthunder. She is actually the mother of Miss Matriarch. So Amber Midthunder, who also was in Prey, her mother is a casting director, and so she has been. She made her focus be casting for Native actors, because we have an issue in the industry of a lot of people playing us that are not actually Native. And so she was a great resource for that. But what she did with Taika and with Sterling at their request was that they didn't want to cast in LA. They wanted to go to Oklahoma. They wanted to go to South Dakota. They wanted to go to Albuquerque. They wanted to go to Seattle. Like, they wanted to go to these major hubs all over the country, and they held casting calls, just like anybody from the community could come out, and that's how they found these actors. Devery Jacobs is the only one of those 4 who's a seasoned actress. I mean, she's been acting for quite a long time, but the others showed up for these cold casting calls. And even the actor who plays Jackie, same thing. She had actually auditioned, or they had auditioned for Laura Dannon's role, and they loved them so much that Elva became Jackie. And then, of course, the Bad Guy Gang, those were all non-actors as well. But it really came from going out. Basically, what Sterling told them when they were casting was like, we don't want people to have to come to us. We should be going to them. And we should be going to these communities and find them. And it's really cool, because for so long, we have been told, like, there just aren't Native actors. And it's not true. It's just that people expect them to all come to LA. And that's just not, it's not going to work. So that was our process for casting, and it continues to be. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello, my name's Luke. I was wondering, also, thanks for coming. I love that show. The characters are very relatable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know how you did such a good job. But I'm wondering, so you're talking about your ideas for season 3 and this like generational trauma and things like that. I just was wondering what the inspiration behind that was, because it feels very contemporary. I don't know, a lot of my friends in high school were dealing with things like that, where it's like, oh my God, I'm dealing with my emotions better than my parents. Like, what is this? So yeah, I was just curious, what was the inspiration behind that? How'd you come up with that?
Yeah, I think the inspiration behind that is that, I mean, I'm sure if you asked any writer in the room, they'd have their own like connection to it. But I think for me, like, I'll just speak for myself, is that, you know, as I get older, I realize like my parents, you know, I think when we're younger, like our parents we're just always disappointed for anything. And you get older and you realize your parents were doing the best they could with what they knew how and based on how they were brought up. And I think that's something that we talk about in the room is like each generation, you know, is raising each other. But I think we don't always consider like what were our grandparents like raising our parents. And, you know, I think for the Native community, specifically for us, you know, we have a legacy of like boarding schools and that our parents were either in boarding school or were raised by parents who were. And that creates a lot of disconnect and dysfunction within families. And so that was something that we wanted to be able to touch on, that there's a reason why people are the way that they are.
Hi, I'm Lily. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Absolutely love Reservation Dog.
Yay, thank you.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your writing process and how it kind of relates to the way that you direct as well, because I thought it was super interesting how you said when you were directing the Sex Lives of College Girls, like that was the first thing you directed that you didn't write. So I was wondering if you, like what inspires you in your writing?
Everything. I'm truly inspired by, this is gonna sound so like basic, but real life, you know. And the thing is like the other writers in the room and some of the other directors are really great at references. Like they can pull out a film from a certain year and say, we want to recreate this scene. And I'm like, what is that? And so there's sort of like there's like a couple of camps in the room. There's people who are drawing from just solely real life, and that's what they want to tell, and that's a story they know. There's other people who, you know, love cinema and want to recreate and pay homage. And so you have this really nice mixture of that in the room. But yeah, I think between like, it was interesting like to go to Sex Lives of College Girls and not write on that show, because you don't have to fix anything at the end of the night. That was honestly like the nicest part. Because the thing about Reservation Dogs and even Rutherford Falls is that when you're also writing on it, your job doesn't stop at the end of the day when you're done directing. You still have to do rewrites for other episodes coming. Or you're also sort of expected to have to like fix something in the moment. Whereas like Sex Lives of College Girls, if there was a script issue, it was actually very strange for me, because if there was something they didn't like or they were just still working out, I've only ever had to help fix. And in this case, like I couldn't do that. So I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. I was like, I only have one hat right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
More questions?
Hi, my name is Mia. I just wanted to like know kind of what's it like to write for write the younger generation more so. Just because I think it's such an authentic portrayal. Like I went back home this weekend and I'm Mexican American. I was like with my cousins and I'm like, oh, those scenes were like, oh, these are how my like little cousins talk right now, and it's just so funny. So like what goes into like trying to capture like the younger generation?
I don't know. Like I think a big part of it is like yeah, like I think those actors bring so much of that energy. You know, they don't really deviate too much from the script, but I don't know. I think in some ways, like most of the writers, including myself in the room, like are still kids. Like we just are. Like I don't feel like we're fully real like adults. Like I think we honestly sit in that room and tell like bad jokes all day, like inappropriate jokes. So I think that there's an element to it where everybody in that room it like really truly does have this young spirit. But there are things for sure that like we have to research. Like when we did the youth conference and we were doing those influencers, like I mentioned, there's a cold open where there were TikToks that were supposed to play on the screen. I had never used TikTok before that. And so I had to download TikTok and actually like, you know, I had seen TikTok on Instagram, like when people take it over from TikTok to Instagram, but I had never used the interface of TikTok before. So I had to go on there and I had to actually like figure out what are the trends and what is this. And I had to delete TikTok last week because I became like addicted to it. I never posted anything, but I was just like, oh my God, I'm like sucked into the vortex. So there's things that come up for sure that we do have to like step outside and like research and kind of immerse ourselves in.
I noticed the kids don't use their phones. Do they have phones? Like I'm sitting here thinking
They have phones. We just
don't. I mean, that's something that's kind of nice because a lot of,
yeah.
you have to deal with the phone.
They use their phones sometimes, but it's usually just to like communicate something short.
Right. They text.
Yeah, they'll text.
You don't see
But they
they're
don't
not
talk.
scrollers.
No, they're not. Yeah, they're not on social media.
Right.
That's so true.
And is that something that is
I don't even think that's a rule of the show. We just didn't do it. Like now that I'm
we
thinking
don't have to
about it.
deal with it. We don't have
Yeah.
to deal with the scrolling.
Yeah, they don't scroll. It's a good observation.
More questions? Yes, no, maybe so. Well, thank you so much for coming and being our final guest. It was great to go out on. Everybody can go home and binge Reservation Dogs.
Please do. Thank you so much for
Look forward to season
coming
3.
to your class. I'm so excited too to tell everyone in the writers' room that so many of you are watching it. So thank you so much.